Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. So today we're unpacking a piece of spiritual philosophy called Gnostic Awakening. And honestly, whether you're a theology buff or just kind of curious about how humanity views the universe, this text really made me stop and think. It completely upends traditional views on religion, power, and the divine. Let's strip away the esoteric jargon and see what it's actually saying, together.
Here's a quick roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to cover 1. The false demiurge in religion. 2. The true good God. 3. Friends of God, not slaves. 4. Free search and texts. And finally, 5. Gnostic ethics and practice. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The false demiurge and religion.
Right off the bat, this text opens with a pretty massive claim that established human religious constructs are fundamentally flawed. To understand why, we've got to look at the concept of the demiurge. The text defines this as a lower creator deity, basically an entity that sits at the head of corrupt religions and demands worship. Because these institutions are supposedly led by this lesser deity, the author believes that trying to reform them from the inside, literally a complete waste of time. The manuscript actually says these structures are rotten from the roots and will just inevitably collapse on their own. The argument here is that fixing a broken religious system is pointless, mainly because the living divine isn't even allowed to be freely explored inside them anyway.
And that brings us to this incredibly powerful quote. All human constructions and forms of God are merely lost in vain attempts to gain power. The source goes on to argue that these are vain attempts to gain power over a divinity that genuinely has zero interest in having people bow down to it. This really hits the nail on the head regarding the text's view on human power dynamics and spirituality. The writer is basically suggesting that when humans build these massive, rigid religious structures, it's not really about connecting with the divine at all. Actually, scratch that. It's much more about humans trying to exert control over other humans.
Which brings us to Section 2, the true good God.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast it presents. If traditional structures are out, what exactly is the alternative? On one hand, you have the demiurge demanding worship, preventing free exploration. But on the other side, the text introduces the true good God. According to the source, this God genuinely needs absolutely zero worship. Why? Because its glory is already infinite. So instead of just sitting back and demanding blind obedience, this true divine force actively seeks out an individual connection, uniquely tailoring its approach to every single person.
And here is where the philosophy becomes incredibly individualized. It presents a direct mathematical equation for spirituality. Billions of people equals billions of paths. Because the true good God values human individuality so much, it approaches every single one of us in a completely unique way. The author is super emphatic about this. Your path to the divine will never, ever be exactly the same as your neighbor's. I mean, imagine the logistical nightmare that would be for a highly organized religion. But here, it's just pure, ultimate personalization. There's no one-size-fits-all religion. There are exactly as many paths to the divine as there are human beings walking the earth.
Now, within this vast framework of billions of paths, the text makes some very specific assertions about the historical figure of Jesus Christ. It states that the true good God physically visited humanity in his form. It describes him as the unique Son of God and man, and the perfect, true image of the Father. Crucially, though, the manuscript points out the tragedy of this visit, stating bluntly that he arrived and, well, humanity murdered him. Yet, interestingly, it frames this event not as a failure, but as a profound testament to the true God physically entering our human reality.
All right, moving on to Section 3, Friends of God, not slaves.
If God is a force that doesn't demand worship, how does that fundamentally change who we are? The text takes a massive swing at traditional religious language right here, completely rejecting the whole concept of spiritual servitude. It contrasts being a servant or slave, which implies subjugation, false obedience, and just being used to puff up a deity's ego, with the liberating idea of being a friend of God. The author argues that a deity who actually needs a human to generate its glory, well, it has no real glory at all. Instead, an authentic encounter with the true divine results in free, radically independent people. You aren't subjugated, you become a friend.
Section 4. Free search and texts. So if we're all independent friends of the divine, freely exploring our own unique paths, how do we actually go about seeking the truth? The text lays out some clear principles for free exploration. First off, you have the absolute right to freely ask any and all religious questions, period. Second, and this is vital, you must never despise other religions. Even though the text is super critical of religious institutions, it openly acknowledges that you can still find precious pieces of truth within them. But the writer does issue one major warning. Do not fake a divine encounter. Pretending to have a spiritual awakening when you haven't is described as walking a shadowy path of death. Though even then, the text notes with this deep optimism that the true good God's mercy will always find a way to restore life to someone who's lost their way.
And when it comes to Scripture, the manuscript makes a really fascinating claim. The true, good God does not physically write holy texts. Since every person receives a completely unique message, no single human written book should ever be viewed as the one exclusive truth. You can and absolutely should share your encounters with others and draw wisdom from the sacred texts of the past. But you also have to keep your eyes open to the present and the future. For a friend of God, there are simply no limitations on where wisdom can be found.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Gnostic Ethics and Practice. This is where the rubber meets the road.
So, the crucial point is, what does someone actually living out this philosophy look like walking down the street? The ultimate proof of this awakening isn't found in high-minded rituals. It's entirely in radical ethics. The text mandates that followers must never, under any circumstances, harm anyone, not even in thought, word, or deed. It just obliterates all in-group and out-group boundaries, literally defining every single human being on earth as your neighbor. And it commands its followers to practice infinite love and infinite forgiveness, mirroring exactly how the true good God endlessly forgives our own wandering mistakes.
To really wrap our heads around why these ethics are so incredibly loving, we just have to look at how the text defines the exact attributes of the true good God. The divine is single because there's simply nothing else like it. It's true because it exists as a reality that is literally closer to us than our own beating hearts. It's good because it's completely devoid of any darkness, malice, or pure evil. And it's eternal. But that doesn't just mean it exists for a super long time. It means it stands firmly with its feet entirely outside of time itself, in eternity. The text urges us to embody these exact traits because this deity is fundamentally defined as the one who truly knows the meaning of the word love.
And all of this culminates in what is probably the most striking quote of the entire source material. Act with respect toward every human individual because you never know if the true, Gnostic, single, true, good God hasn't just come to visit you. Just think about how heavily that weighs on a simple, everyday interaction, like at the grocery store or when someone cuts you off in traffic. The text is literally telling its readers that the stranger standing right in front of you might actually be a physical manifestation of the divine. That means every mundane, totally ordinary interaction is immediately elevated to a potentially sacred encounter.
Which leaves us with this final, burning question to consider. How would our society change if everyone viewed their neighbor through this exact lens? What if every single person you interacted with wasn't just another random face in the crowd, but a unique, infinitely valuable friend of a divine force that genuinely respects them? It's a completely staggering paradigm shift, asking us to replace judgment and subjugation with radical, infinite love. Thank you so much for hanging out and exploring this profound text with me today. Let that question linger and keep seeking your own unique path of understanding.